Hello, my name is Tessa McBurney, and I'm the Atlantic Bat Conservation Project Technician with the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative Atlantic Region. And today I'm going to go over how to manually identify files using the Kaleidoscope software. So there are two methods that you can use to manually identify acoustic files, and it will depend on your version of software. So the first method is the Kaleidoscope free version method. And so this is the method you will use if you have downloaded the free version of Kaleidoscope software, which is now called Kaleidoscope Lite. If you have the Pro version of software with the Auto ID capabilities, you will follow the second method I'm going to go through today. So we are going to start with the first method, the method using the Kaleidoscope free version of software. Okay, so to start, you're first going to want to open the Kaleidoscope Converter window, which you do by clicking on the desktop icon for Kaleidoscope. Okay, so you're going to open your first file for your survey. So you're just going to go to File and Open. And then I'm going to go to a stationary survey folder, but this can be for any data. Maybe it's for your mobile transect. And I'm going to pick my first site, which is the farm site. And then remember, if you saw some of our other videos, you'll know that we've selected to split up our survey by recording night. So we have a folder for each recording night. So I'm going to go into the first night, and I'm going to pick the first acoustic file from within that folder. And we won't worry about the noise file for now. And then I'm going to click Open. And there, that opens my first file in the Kaleidoscope Viewer window. So just a note, make sure you follow those steps and that you never accidentally hit the Process Files button again once you've processed your files for the first time, because it will reprocess your files, which takes time, but it will also overwrite everything that you typed in before in the NABAT project form in terms of your metadata. So if you do that by accident, you're going to have to go back in and re-add your metadata, and it definitely does take time, so just make note of that. You would only need to reprocess your files if for some reason you wanted to change some of your settings or have a different file type created, or if you wanted to change some of your metadata. Another note, to use this method, you can't have the results table open in Kaleidoscope, which we don't have open now. But this could potentially open, especially if you just processed your files. Sometimes the results table will open automatically depending on the version of software you're using. So I'll just show you what that looks like. So you can see here my file opened just like it did when I opened the file the other way, but I also have this results table open. So if this table is open, you cannot use this method I'm going to describe. So make sure that that table is closed. So I'm just going to open the file the first way I opened it, just to make sure there are no errors. So just using open. Okay, so there's our first file. Great. Okay. So it is a bat, so that's great. So before I can give it a manual ID label, I need to create those labels in the Kaleidoscope Viewer window. So I already have my labels created, which you can see here below in this panel. So I've included every option here that you would need in Atlantic Canada. So you may not need all of these options depending on your region. There are two labels I don't have here, so I'll add them and I'll show you. So to create a manual ID label, you're just going to right click on one of these gray boxes. So see, it's highlighted in white. So I'm going to right click on it. And then I'm just going to type my desired label into the box. So one of the groupings I'm missing is for high frequency bats, so high F. So I'm just going to type that into the box. So again, I'm going to right click I'll do it over here, and I'm going to add low F because I also don't have the low frequency species grouping, so I'll add that in there. So I'm not going to go through what each of these labels are. You can find all of these codes and common groupings in our guide in table 6 and 11. So you can check those out there, but that is how you create labels. So if you are uploading these data to the NABAT website, make sure that you're using the appropriate labels, so the right codes for NABAT. Okay, so now I have all of my labels created. That's great. Oh, and once you do that, these, like you saw when I opened my Kaleidoscope viewer, these labels will save, so you don't have to worry about typing them in each time you open Kaleidoscope. They should save. And if you want to delete a label, you should just be able to right click and then backspace and hit enter, and then that label is deleted. Okay, great. So now we are able to manually ID our files. So I'm not going to explain how to manually ID, like what species to label the files in this video. That is described in great detail in our guide, so I would recommend checking that out if you are unfamiliar with species ID. So for now, I'm just going to select labels without worrying too much about the ID. So when you want to select a label, all you have to do is click on it and then hit the enter button. Okay. If the file does have multiple bat passes or sequences, so if it has more than one bat within the file, just select the correct label for one of the sequences and then check out section 4.7.3.14 in our guide for more information on what to do if you have more than one bat pass within one file. So now that you've clicked enter, you should see your auto or your manual ID choice in the identification space in the Kaleidoscope viewer window. So you can see here in the identification box, I've selected 40K Mayo as my species, and that has now shown up in the box. So that's great. That worked. So I've assigned this file that label. And once you do that, you should be able to move to the next file. So remember, you can use the shortcut key if you saw some of our other videos. You can press the down arrow to move to the next file. Alternatively, you can press the single line arrow button to move to the next file. And you can see I haven't selected an identification yet for this file, but if I go back, that identification has been saved. So just maybe do that at least for the first few files to make sure everything is saving properly. A little shortcut you can also use is you can check this box under identification called Auto Next File. If you do that, as soon as you click on your selected manual ID button, it will automatically move to the next file, so you don't even have to worry about pressing an arrow key or selecting this button. So just for example, I'll select 40K Mayo again, and then it's switching to the next file. So you can start to go through those fairly quickly, especially once you become familiar with IDing bats. Okay, that's great. So it allowed me to go through, and likely because I have the version of software that allows for auto ID, it is giving me a suggestion below the identification box, maybe for what species I want to use to ID this file. So there's that as well. And so you'll just proceed that way until all files have been manually identified within that file folder, which I've done because I only had a few files within that file folder. So once that's done, you can either select this double line arrow to move to the next folder. So that will move to your next monitoring night, which is a handy function. And then you can just continue from there to manually identify the files. and go through, and it's pretty fast. Obviously, when you're IDing files, you need to take more time to look at them, but I'm not going to show you how to do that here. I'm just showing how you switch between files. If you need to go back to the previous file folder, again, you're going to select the left pointing double line arrow. And you can just go through until you've manually identified all of the files at that site. It is important to note, though, that you should also ensure that you are checking your noise folder. So in here, I only have one noise file, but I should still look at that because the software can accidentally sometimes put a bat pass into the noise folder, especially if it's poor quality. So we can see here, this is likely a bat, but there is only one pulse in 0x format. So I would ID this file as noise. I'm not going to explain how we define a bat pass. You can find that in our guide, but you do need 3 or more pulses in 0x of a certain quality. So I would designate this file as noise. So in this case, Kaleidoscope did screen that appropriately. Okay. So make sure that you do go in and you check all of the noise folders quickly as well, just to make sure that you're not missing any bat passes. So in each night, you'll have to have a look. Here's an example where the software designated this as noise, but it could be a bat pass. So it isn't the best quality, but there are more than 3 pulses in 0x. So this could definitely be a bat pass, and Kaleidoscope did screen it as noise, so that just shows you that you really do need to check the noise files as well. Okay. So once you've done this for all of your files, in a later step, you're going to create a metadata file, and when you do that, the manual ID column should automatically populate. So don't worry about it not showing up in any of your other data sheets right now. So in your meta.csv, which you created when you processed your data, just go back to that sheet and show you. So we were using the farm site. So remember, we created this meta.csv, and it does have a manual ID column, but you'll notice none of the manual IDs I assigned populated in this column. So that is okay, that it is supposed to happen that way. So don't worry about it. When you create your metadata file later on, the manual ID column should populate then. If you would like to fill in this column in the spreadsheet, you will have to copy and paste the manual IDs from the metadata file once you've created it and add them in here. Just make sure if you are moving data between spreadsheets that you're making sure that it lines up properly, and in doing that, you should properly sort the data to prevent mislabeling of files. So if you sort both spreadsheets, I'll quickly show you how to do that. So if you go to the top of Excel to sort and filter, and click on that, and then choose custom sort. And in the column sort by, you're going to select the audio recording name option. So this one here, audio recording name. And then if you select cell value, so that you can leave that, and then the order A to Z, and then click OK, that should, and you do that in both files before you start moving data, that should allow both spreadsheets to sort in the same way. So when you're copying and pasting data from the manual ID column in the metadata file to the meta.csv, then you're ensuring that the file order is the same, because obviously you want your manual ID to match the file name and not assign the wrong manual ID to the wrong file name. So make sure that you always sort your files first if you're going to be doing that. Okay, hopefully that was clear. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to manually identify files using the second method, so the Kaleidoscope Pro version, the method you can use if you've purchased Kaleidoscope software. And so to do this again, we're going to open our Kaleidoscope converter window. So you can just open that using the Kaleidoscope icon on your desktop. And this is if you've already closed the files once you've processed them. When you process the files, the first file will automatically open with the open results table, which you need open for this method. But if you close that file for some reason, like I have, this is how you would reopen that file. So again, we're going to launch our Kaleidoscope converter window. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is make sure that we still have the correct input and output directories. So for input, browse, and ensure that you have the data that you want to manually ID, you have that file folder selected. So first I'm going to analyze the data from my stationary survey farm site. So I still have the correct input folder, the raw data folder. So I will select that folder. And for output, I want the matching farm folder, but in the process data folder. So process data, stationary survey, farm, great. That's correct. So I'm going to select that folder. And then once you do that, you can go to File, then Open Results. And then you're going to select the id.csv file that was created when you processed your files. So again, I'm in the farm stationary survey folder, so I'm going to select that id.csv and open. And that will open my first farm site acoustic file along with the open results table, which you can see here. So that's perfect. So just a reminder, do not select process files in the Kaleidoscope converter window because if you do that, you risk overwriting all of the metadata you created when you originally processed your files. So you do not need to process the files. Just remember that you are going to open results in the file dropdown. Okay, so now that our open results table is open, we can begin going through and manually identifying our files. Okay, so you can see here that we already have our species labels created, but I'll quickly show you how to do that again in case you skipped the first part of this video. So you'll want to create the species label that you'll want to assign the file. So here I have all of the labels for Atlantic Canada, but you can select whichever labels are appropriate for your region. And to create a species label, you will just hover your mouse over one of these empty squares and left click when it turns white, and then you can type in the label that you want and then select enter or hit the enter button. And to remove a label, you just backspace and enter. So that way you can assign your appropriate labels. Okay, so as you go through the files, and again, I'm not going to show you how to manually identify files here, but you will simply click on one of these species labels to assign that label to the file. So for this one, I've assigned it 40K Mayo, which shows up in the identification box here on the right. So I have auto ID capability with the purchase version of software, and so the Kaleidoscope software also gives me a recommendation for how I should label this file. You can see that they use the 6-letter species codes, whereas NABAT uses the 4-letter species codes. So even if you do want to go with that code or that species, Eastern Redbat in this case, you'll want to make sure that you use your 4-letter species code, so LABO instead of last 4, to ensure that the data can be uploaded to NABAT. So once you do that, you can move to the next file either by selecting the downward arrow on your keyboard or this single line arrow button on the right. We'll click that and we move to the next file. So I've already ID'd a few of these as an example. So let's just go forward. Okay, so you can see here the identification box is empty. I haven't identified this file yet. So I can ID this file and move to the next one. A way to make it a little faster is if you check this Auto Next File button here. If you check mark that and you select one of these species code buttons, you will automatically move to the next file, just like that. And then you see if I go back, those files have their identifications. A quick way to do it, although you will want to be looking at the files more closely. Again, I'm not showing you how, or like I'm not showing you the thought process for actually choosing the species ID for these files. I'm just showing you how you would manually ID these files. And so as you go through, you will do that until you go through all the files, or you need to stop for whatever reason. Whenever you stop, you're going to pull up the open results table. So you can see here that as I've gone, the manual ID has populated here in the open results table. And I have blanks because I haven't gone through all of the files yet. So to use this method, you will need to have a manual ID column in this table, which you should have automatically. You will also need the in-file column. The other columns you don't need, so you can remove those as you want. But to edit columns, you will just go to File, Edit Columns. And then you can choose to either hide or show those columns in the table. So I won't use the match ratio column, which is on show, so I can hide that column and then select OK. And that's match ratio here, so keep your eye on that. When I hit OK, that column disappears. If I want to re-add it, I simply go to Edit Columns, scroll down and find match ratio, and then select show and OK. And then that column will come back, but at the end of the table. So again, the two columns you definitely need to have are manual ID and your in-file column. So this is the most important thing, that once you finish manually IDing these files, either you go through all of them or you need to take a break, you need to save this table. If you do not save this table, you will lose your manual IDs. So it's very important to save. I would actually save as you go along, save regularly. You can't save too often to ensure that you're not losing those manual IDs. So if you do that and then you need to take a break and you close Kaleidoscope, but you still have more files you need to go through, just open your Kaleidoscope converter again. Make sure that your input and output are still correct, but I haven't touched them, so I know that Kaleidoscope will remember the last choices I had in here, so that's fine. And then you will open results. Again, your id.csv and open. Okay, so it will automatically open the first file in the open results table. So if I want to go back to where I was, I just scroll down in the open results table. This is the next file to ID. I can just click on that file. There you go, and it will move to that file automatically, and then I can just continue from there. So just keep going from there. And then of course, making sure I save before I close this table again. So like with the other method, you will want to make sure that you're not looking at just all the files that have been auto-ID'd as bats, but also that you look through all the noise files. So this open results table is sorted by auto-ID. So it doesn't actually sort the files. You don't go through them chronologically like you do with the other method by monitoring night. So you can see first you're looking at the files that it's thinking are Eastern Redbat, and then you go through. So just make sure that the noise files will all be at the bottom. So make sure that you just continue and manually ID all of the files in this list. So don't skip the noise files at the end. Okay, so once you do that and you go through all of the files within a certain site, I'm just going to save. It's good practice. And you can close these windows. So you can see that if you open your id.csv Excel spreadsheet, if I open this, you can see that all of your manual IDs have been added automatically to the manual ID column. Okay, so maybe when you're first starting, you should do a few files and save your open results table, and then just make sure that they're saving in this Excel spreadsheet. So don't have this spreadsheet open when you're going through your files, but just save your files and then open this and just make sure that the files are saving, and then close this id.csv before you continue looking through files. It's always good just to make sure that things are working properly. So just a note that your meta.csv, the manual ID column will not automatically populate in this spreadsheet. So if you do want, you don't need your manual IDs in this spreadsheet, because when you create your metadata spreadsheet, after you manually ID all of the files, the manual ID column in the metadata sheet will automatically populate from your id.csv, so you don't have to worry about copying and pasting. But if you do, for some reason, want this manual ID column populated, you would have to copy and paste from your id.csv spreadsheet. So again, just make sure that if you're copying data between two different spreadsheets, that you are sorting the spreadsheets first in an identical way. So you are making sure that the manual ID matches with the appropriate audio recording name. So again, you can do that by just custom sort and filter, custom sort by audio recording name, cell values A to Z. And if you do that in both spreadsheets before copying and pasting the data, it should result in your manual IDs lining up with the correct file. So just double check and make sure that that is sorting appropriately and you're assigning the right manual ID to the right file. Okay, great. So that is how you manually open and identify files using the Pro version of the Kaleidoscope software. I hope that was helpful.